James and Luke Thompson weren't ordinary brothers from Liverpool. By their early 20s they had built one of the most ruthless and organized county lines operations in the country, moving crack and heroin across hundreds of miles. Known on the streets as Scouse Dave, they ran their empire like a business with managers, couriers, and rules enforced by fear. But ambition has a price, and their quest for control would draw the attention of law enforcement and betrayals from within, threatening to bring their carefully constructed empire crashing down. In the heart of Liverpool, where the streets twisted between old brick buildings and faded warehouses, two brothers quietly began to build a reputation. Known only to some as Scouse Dave, their presence was subtle at first, almost invisible. They moved through the city like shadows, watching, learning and waiting for the right moment to step into the world of serious crime. Liverpool had always been a city of contrasts. Its bustling docks and historic streets were home to both opportunity and danger. For the brothers, opportunity came in the form of small-scale drug dealing. They began modestly, selling cannabis and small amounts of cocaine to neighbors and acquaintances. It was low risk, and the profits were enough to catch their attention. But the streets taught lessons quickly. Deals could turn violent without warning, and rival dealers often tried to muscle in on territory. The brothers understood that success would require more than charm or bravado. It demanded structure, discipline, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. By the time they reached their early 20s, they had begun to see the outlines of a larger plan. They weren't content with local fame, they wanted control. The turning point came when they realized that county lines offered a way to scale their operations far beyond Liverpool. County lines, a term used to describe the trafficking of drugs from cities into smaller towns, had grown into a lucrative system, but the brothers saw potential for something more sophisticated. They wanted not just to move drugs but to create a recognizable brand, a network so organized that it resembled a legitimate business. And like any ambitious enterprise, it needed rules, hierarchies, and loyal personnel. They started recruiting carefully, choosing young couriers who could be molded into reliable operatives. Many were teenagers, drawn in with promises of money, power, and status. The brothers trained them meticulously. Each courier received instructions on routes, contacts, and ways to avoid law enforcement. Phones were coded, messages were encrypted, and cash movements were tracked. Loyalty was demanded, and any breach was met with swift consequences. Violence was never random, it was calculated and deliberate, a tool for maintaining control and ensuring obedience. The brothers' early operations within Liverpool were testing grounds for their system. They observed patterns in police patrols, noted the behaviors of rival gangs, and adjusted their methods accordingly. The streets became a laboratory, and every minor success or failure offered lessons. As their influence grew, so did their confidence. Small-time dealers started reporting to them rather than challenging them. Fear and respect intertwined, making the brothers figures of authority in neighborhoods that once seemed chaotic and uncontrollable. Despite their growing notoriety, they maintained a low public profile. To outsiders, they were just another part of the city's backdrop, young men navigating life in a tough environment. But beneath the surface, they were building the foundation of an empire. Every detail mattered: the timing of deliveries, the selection of couriers, and the management of finances. Mistakes were minimized, and efficiency became their mantra. By the time they were ready to expand beyond Liverpool, they had created a system that was more than criminal. It was industrial. The Scouse Dave brand was not yet widely known outside the city, but it carried the promise of order, precision, and power. What began as a simple attempt to make money had evolved into a blueprint for domination. The brothers weren't just dealers. They were architects of a network that would soon stretch hundreds of miles, connecting Liverpool to towns across the south of England. The city that raised them had unknowingly produced the leaders of one of the most organized county lines operations the country had ever seen. The brothers' first step beyond Liverpool was calculated. Gosport, a coastal town hundreds of miles south, became their testing ground. It was far enough from their home city to avoid immediate attention, yet small enough that a determined group could assert control quickly. They didn't rush. Expansion required patience, planning, and precision. Couriers were selected carefully, teenagers who could be molded into reliable operatives. Each was given a code name, a route, and a set of strict instructions. Their phones were encrypted, cash was handled methodically, and deliveries were timed to the minute. Mistakes were not tolerated. At first, Gosport seemed like a distant, unfamiliar world. Local dealers eyed the newcomers with suspicion, and rival gangs were quick to challenge any intrusion. But the brothers' approach was methodical rather than reckless. They established a network of trusted contacts, often using intermediaries to test loyalties before moving higher-value shipments. Every move was designed to minimize risk and maximize control. Violence was never gratuitous. It was strategic. Anyone who opposed the brothers' plan disappeared from the streets without warning. Fear spread quietly but effectively, ensuring obedience without drawing immediate law enforcement attention. Within months, Gosport was under their influence. Couriers moved between Liverpool and the town on a regular schedule, carrying crack and heroin, with cash and coded messages flowing in the other direction. The brothers had effectively created a branch office of their Liverpool operation, complete with local managers who oversaw distribution, kept track of finances, and reported back to the city. The system was efficient, almost corporate in its execution. The local population began to notice a subtle change. Crime patterns shifted. Dealers who once competed were now aligned, and the flow of drugs became predictable yet invisible to casual observation. Encouraged by this success, the brothers set their sights further south. Plymouth, with its busy ports and sprawling neighborhoods, presented new opportunities and challenges. Unlike Gosport, Plymouth was home to multiple small gangs with established territories. The brothers adapted their approach, using intelligence gathered from couriers and local informants to identify weak points. Routes were mapped in detail, couriers were given contingency plans, and the timing of every delivery was optimized. It was a logistical operation that resembled a high-stakes game of chess, where each piece moved with precision and every misstep could prove deadly. As their influence expanded, the Scouse Dave brand became known beyond Liverpool. Reputation traveled fast in criminal circles, and the brothers learned to use it as a weapon. Dealers in Plymouth and surrounding towns feared them, not only for their willingness to enforce rules with violence, but for the professionalism of their operation. Unlike chaotic street gangs, the brothers ran a system that demanded loyalty and punished betrayal swiftly. It was a hierarchy designed for control and growth, where each layer depended on obedience to function. Yet even as the empire grew, vulnerabilities began to emerge. Couriers occasionally drew attention, and law enforcement slowly began noticing patterns in drug movement. Rival gangs tested boundaries, and internal tensions threatened to destabilize the careful order the brothers had built. Still, for now, their expansion was unstoppable. Every town they touched became a node in an expanding network, and each success reinforced the belief that their ambition could be realized. The Liverpool brothers had not merely spread drugs. They had exported an idea that crime could be organized, strategic, and scalable. What had started in the streets of their city was now a network connecting distant towns, each linked by loyalty, fear, and meticulously controlled operations. Gosport and Plymouth were only the beginning. The blueprint was established, and the empire was growing, inch by calculated inch, toward a reach that would eventually span hundreds of miles. Their ambition was clear, their methods ruthless, and the tension in the air suggested that nothing would stand in their way, yet the seeds of downfall were already quietly taking root. The backbone of the brothers' operation was its structure, a system so meticulously organized that it resembled a legitimate business rather than a criminal enterprise. At the top were the brothers themselves, overseeing every detail from Liverpool, their home base. Below them were regional managers, carefully chosen for loyalty and competence. These managers controlled entire towns, handling local logistics, finances, and dispute. They were the bridge between the brothers' vision and the ground reality, responsible for ensuring that each courier followed strict protocols. Couriers formed the next tier, the lifeblood of the operation. Often teenagers, they were trained to navigate unfamiliar towns, deliver drugs, collect cash, and maintain secrecy under pressure. Each courier carried multiple phones, each with a specific purpose, one for communication with the managers, one for coded messages, and one for emergencies. Cash was counted continuously, and every transaction was logged. Mistakes were not tolerated. A single misstep could trigger punishment, sometimes violent, to ensure the operation remained disciplined. The brothers had developed a system of accountability that was nearly foolproof. Couriers were required to check in at scheduled times, reporting locations, deliveries, and any unusual incidents. Any deviation was investigated immediately. If a courier went missing or failed to report, alarms went off in Liverpool, prompting immediate action. This constant monitoring created a sense of omnipresence. Couriers knew they were never truly alone, and that knowledge kept them in line. The operation thrived on precision and fear, each reinforcing the other. Money flowed like clockwork. Regional managers collected proceeds from sales, accounted for them, and sent summaries back to Liverpool. The brothers invested profits carefully, both to maintain the operation and to conceal the trail from law enforcement. Everything had a purpose. The selection of towns, the timing of shipments, even the choice of vehicles. Nothing was left to chance. It was a net reaction, exposing the network to danger. Despite these risks, the brothers pressed on. Confident in their system, they had turned criminal enterprise into something methodical, almost industrial. Their empire relied not on chance but on planning, communication, and discipline. Every courier, manager, and town functioned as part of a larger machine, each step reinforcing their dominance. From the outside it seemed unstoppable, a force moving with relentless precision. Yet even as the network expanded, there were warning signs unnoticed by the brothers. Patterns of courier movements, recurring financial trails, and the occasional disappearance of a worker were tiny threads that, if pulled, could unravel the entire operation. Their brilliance lay in organization. Their weakness lay in the human element they could never fully control. As they tightened the system and expanded territory, the seeds of tension were planted, setting the stage for cracks that would one day threaten to destroy everything they had built. The empire had grown from simple street-level deals to a sophisticated, multi-town operation. It was efficient, ruthless, and carefully controlled, a criminal enterprise that mirrored the most disciplined corporations. But behind the precision and loyalty, a question lingered. Could a system so dependent on control survive the unpredictable nature of human behavior, law enforcement, and rival ambition? The answer would come sooner than they expected, and when it did, it would change everything. For years, the Liverpool brothers' empire had seemed untouchable, a model of precision and control. But no system, no matter how carefully constructed, is immune to pressure. The first cracks appeared quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the small towns where their couriers operated. A teenager caught carrying drugs in Gosport sparked an investigation that hinted at something larger. The police had no idea of the full scale yet, but the breadcrumbs were beginning to form a trail back to Liverpool. Rival gangs were another source of disruption. In Plymouth, local dealers who had once avoided confrontation began testing boundaries, challenging the brothers' authority. Tensions grew over territory, deliveries, and loyalty. The brothers responded with the same calculated ruthlessness that had defined their rise. Threats, intimidation, and selective acts of violence reasserted control, but every intervention left traces. Each move, carefully hidden from public view, added to a growing map that law enforcement could piece together if they looked closely enough. Internal tension was perhaps the most dangerous crack. Couriers, often young and impressionable, were beginning to question the risks. Some disappeared without explanation, raising suspicion of betrayal. Others chafed under the constant scrutiny and rigid rules. The brothers had built an empire dependent on fear and loyalty, but even fear has limits. Every disappearance, every minor rebellion, required the brothers to act decisively, sometimes violently, to maintain authority. Each action, while restoring order temporarily, also left clues, hidden patterns that could be followed by those paying attention. Communication remained critical, yet increasingly complicated. The brothers' system of encrypted phones and coded messages was sophisticated. But human error became inevitable. Missed check-ins, dropped messages, and unexplained delays created small gaps in the network. While the brothers attempted to plug these holes, each gap became a potential weak point. Law enforcement, patient and methodical, began noticing patterns in the otherwise flawless operation. They traced shipments, monitored couriers, and built a slowly expanding map of the empire's reach. The pressure was compounded by the operation's own success. Expansion had brought power, but also exposure. Every new noun, every additional courier, increased the number of eyes and ears. Each layer of the empire was another opportunity for mistakes, betrayal, or law enforcement detection. The brothers had created a machine, but machines are vulnerable when the components are human, and humans, unlike machines, are unpredictable. The most dangerous fracture came from within. One trusted courier, who had risen in the ranks through loyalty and competence, began to fear for his own safety. He had seen what happened to those who faltered, and he realized he had information worth more than the money he had earned. Quietly, he began cooperating with law enforcement, providing detailed insights into the operation's structure, routes, and personnel. His knowledge was comprehensive, everything from financial flows to the identity of regional managers. The brothers sensed nothing. Their obsession with control blinded them to the subtle signs of betrayal. They tightened rules, doubled monitoring, and increased violence against perceived threats, but the cracks had already grown too large. What had seemed like minor disruptions, disappearances, delays, and challenges from rivals were actually the early warnings of a system under siege. By now, the network that once operated with ruthless precision was showing stress. Couriers were anxious, regional managers frustrated, and the flow of cash and drugs was no longer seamless. The empire, so carefully built on loyalty, discipline, and fear, was beginning to fray at the edges. Every town, every delivery, and every decision carried risk. The operation's very success had made it vulnerable. The brothers' dream of domination was approaching a turning point, one that would test not only their control but their survival. For all their planning and ruthlessness, the empire had entered a dangerous new phase. Forces they could not fully predict, law enforcement, human betrayal, and rival ambition, were converging. The system that had seemed untouchable was now exposed to pressure from every angle. The fall, when it came, would be as dramatic and calculated as the rise had been, leaving no part of the operation untouched. The fall of the Liverpool brothers' empire came not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow, inevitable collapse, the result of years of expansion, tension, and human error. Law enforcement, armed with intelligence from the informant, had spent months mapping the network. They tracked couriers, monitored communications, and patiently waited for the right moment. The empire that once moved with precision and fear was now exposed, vulnerable to a coordinated strike. It began with raids in Gosport and Plymouth, the towns that had first been integrated into the operation. Police seized cash, drugs, and encrypted phones, unraveling the flow of the network piece by piece. Regional managers, once untouchable figures in their communities, were arrested or questioned, leaving gaps in leadership. The couriers, already anxious from internal tension and fear of betrayal, began to crumble under the pressure. Some fled, some turned themselves in, and others were detained in coordinated operations that cut across multiple towns. The brothers, confident in their system and blinded by years of control, were caught off guard. They had built a machine designed to withstand external threats, but they had never accounted for a betrayal from within. The informant, once loyal and trusted, had provided law enforcement with an intricate map of the operation. Every route, every contact, and every hidden cache was revealed. It was a meticulous blueprint for dismantling an empire that had seemed untouchable. Desperate to maintain control, the brothers attempted to go underground. They moved between safe houses, shifted couriers, and tried to salvage parts of the network. But every step left traces. Phones were intercepted, vehicles were tracked, and surveillance followed their movements. Their attempts to rebuild were futile. The very systems that had made them powerful were now being used against them. The empire's downfall was not only legal, but psychological. Fear, which had been a tool of control, turned against them. Couriers and regional managers who had once obeyed without question, now provided testimony. Rivals, sensing weakness, encroached on territory that had been firmly under the brothers' command. The network that had thrived on precision and discipline began to collapse in chaos, each fracture feeding the next. The final blow came when the brothers themselves were arrested in a coordinated operation spanning Liverpool, Gosport, and Plymouth. Authorities seized evidence linking them directly to multiple counties, including cash, weapons, and drug shipments. The trial that followed revealed the depth and sophistication of their enterprise. Prosecutors detailed a system that resembled a legitimate corporation, complete with hierarchies, management and accountability measures. Yet it was a criminal machine built on fear, violence, and control. Perhaps the most startling revelation was the scale of their reach. The empire had spanned hundreds of miles, affecting towns that few had realized were connected. The Scouse Dave brand, once whispered in fear, became a headline in newspapers, a case study in how ambition and ruthlessness could create both dominance and vulnerability. In the end, the brothers' dream of expansion ended in collapse. Their couriers faced prison or rehabilitation, regional managers were convicted, and towns slowly returned to a fragile sense of normalcy. The empire, once a model of efficiency and control, became a cautionary tale. No system, no matter how organized, can fully survive the unpredictability of human behavior, law enforcement, and betrayal from within. The story of the Liverpool brothers serves as a stark reminder of the cost of ambition. They rose from the streets, building a network of fear and efficiency, only to fall under the weight of the very elements they had sought to dominate. What began as a small operation in Liverpool ended as one of the most organized and notorious county lines cases the country had seen. The Scouse Dave brand, once synonymous with power and control, now exists only as a lesson in how even the most meticulous criminal empires can unravel.